Hello, everyone. My name is Tina Seydu. I'm a third-year medical student, and I am the treasurer. I want to welcome you to the start of our specialty series. Today, we'll be starting with pediatrics. So this series is a part of our Sowing Seeds program created by our national president, Flo Ebem, in collaboration with our Alumni and Multicultural Affairs National Subcommittee. Throughout this year-long program, we will provide you with resources on how to be a successful pre-med and medical student, and we will touch on a variety of topics related to financial literacy and preparing for board exams and much more. So please make sure please make sure that you are a national member by visiting our website at snma.org and signing up to stay in the know. So tonight we have 4 amazing doctors from all over the country who are excited to talk to you about the field of pediatrics and to answer any of the questions that you have.
Go ahead. Okay. Hi, I'm Dr. Jennifer Walton. I'm a developmental behavioral pediatrician from Nationwide Children's Hospital. I also direct a Center on Excellence in Developmental and Disabilities with regards to clinical services with Ohio State, and I'm chair of the pediatric section of the National Medical Association. It's an honor to be here.
Am I next? Hi, I'm Dr. McBride, Danielle McBride. I am originally from Sacramento, California. I am a general pediatrician, so I do primary and urgent care. I mainly work at UCSF, University of California, San Francisco, at their county clinic. I also do some work at a nonprofit in Oakland. Along with my clinical work, I am also the assistant plus director, plus it's an acronym for Pediatric Leaders Advancing Health Equity. And so that's kind of my non-clinical side. And I'm happy to be here, happy to be answering questions and being with you all.
Right. Hello, everyone. So excited to be here with you. My name is Dr. Jessica Fowler. I am a pediatric critical care doctor, so working in PICU at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, originally from St. Louis, Missouri. That is my main clinical job. So I work in the pediatric ICU, taking care of kids with all kinds of illnesses. My non-clinical time from a kind of research quality improvement standpoint is looking at post-cardiac arrest care in children. And then my sort of administrative focus is on physician diversity workforce. So I help lead a group called the Alliance of Minority Physicians at both Penn and CHOP, as well as oversee our visiting partnership programs for minority students.
Dr. Cholonu?
Okay, can you guys hear me? I'm sorry, I've been having some tech issues. Okay, great, fixed it. So my name is Chidama Cholonu. I am a PGY1 at University of Chicago Comer Children's Hospital in categorical pediatrics. I went to Morehouse School of Medicine for medical school, graduated in 2019, also earned my master's in public health from the George Washington University before medical school. And I'm originally from New Jersey, went to undergrad at Rutgers University. I'm sorry, I missed the beginning. So is there anything else I'm supposed to put in my intro? Okay, great.
All right, so that was actually a great segue into the next part. So if everyone could please give us some details about your personal story. So maybe where you trained for medical school. You've already told us where you are now, but how did you choose pediatrics? Did you have any mentors in the field? And just tell us, what is your favorite thing about the field of pediatrics?
I guess I'll go first. I'm originally from Northeastern Ohio. So I did a lot of my original training in Northeastern Ohio. At that time, I went through an accelerated BSMD program through, it's now called NeoMed. It used to be called NeoUCOM, Northeastern Ohio University's College of Medicine. And after I graduated, I did residency in pediatrics at the Children's Hospital of Michigan in Detroit, I'll back up. My original interest in pediatrics probably started when I was in middle school. If my mother was around, she would tell me that's when it really began, because I actually shadowed my pediatrician when I was in the 6th grade. And I just had the interest. I loved children and I loved my pediatrician. He was awesome. And so I wanted to just see what he did. And so that's what started my path. And then during medical school, that would continue to be my passion. And during undergrad in Detroit at Children's Hospital of Michigan, which I loved. I loved my time there. I loved definitely serving my population, and I loved my attendings and my chiefs and my mentors and my colleagues. And so I was in a continuity clinic, and you'll hear that more and more. And I just started noticing a couple toddlers who just were not speaking, which was unusual, right? That's not appropriate. It's not developmentally normal, and just were not having the best eye contact, and it bothered me. And so though I referred them for, definitely, hearing evaluation therapies, early intervention services, and then I wasn't getting the feedback I thought. I wasn't getting the return of, okay, they've been connected, which led to quality improvement projects and initiatives. And that's what started my interest in developmental and behavioral pediatrics. And so I decided to go and complete a fellowship at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, and had a wonderful time there, earned my master's in public health at Penn, learned a great deal of knowledge, not just in different developmental and behavioral concerns, but also advocacy, and advocating for children's rights and children's needs, and making sure they have the appropriate resources so that way they're not affected by adverse childhood experiences or other social determinants of health. And so that's what led to me completing my fellowship there. And then I thought, all right, it's time for me to come back to Ohio, maybe not Northeastern Ohio, but definitely back to Ohio. And so that's what brought me back to Columbus, which I'm happy here at Nationwide Children's, doing a lot of great things. So I'll stop there.
I can go next. I would say my interest in health in general started pretty early on. My path is a little different in that I didn't go to public school until college. So I was homeschooled by my mom. We had a really big family. I have 8 brothers and sisters. And so she always had dreams of being a nurse, but of course started having us and wasn't able to finish nursing school. And so I kind of got that interest from her. It was just kind of how she taught us and her kind of bent when teaching. And so that interest just carried through. After finishing school at home, I started off in community college. And there I had a lot of, decisions about, do I want to do major in math? Do I want to major in something health? Do I want to do nursing? And I remember vividly a conversation with my mom, because I was thinking, nursing or medicine. And she was like, hey, time's going to pass anyway. So don't be scared of the time. Just do what you actually are interested in and love to do. And so I said, okay, I'm going to go for it. And so that's what I did. After transferring from community college, I went to UC Berkeley to finish off my undergrad. At that time, I took a couple of years off just because finances were a challenge, and I couldn't pay for MCATs or anything like that. So I took a couple of years off to work, and then applied. I went to medical school at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore, and completed that. But I really wanted to come back home, and so after that, I applied to UCSF, in particular the PLUS program. It's a program that kind of has a specific curriculum for pediatricians looking to get extra training in leadership and advocacy. And so I went into that program, and it just really, it was just a really special experience. It really kind of gave me a sense of what I actually want to do, which is, yes, do general pediatric care, but also think a little bit more broadly outside the clinic, what's going on, thinking more broadly about health and how we can kind of work in those ACEs and social determinants. And so so that was kind of my path. The thing I love about pediatrics is I just love the variety that you get, from your babies who can't talk to your teens who are trying to make really big decisions and kind of take a little bit more ownership about their health and their life. I find that to be really fun. And it's such a formative time in life. And so you get a chance to just be with people as they're walking this out, be with families, be with, caregivers and children. And just, it's a special time to me. So I enjoyed it a lot. And so that's kind of what I love about it. You should definitely, yeah.
Great. I'll just keep the order going. So I'm originally from St. Louis, Missouri, like I shared, and that's really where my interest in pediatrics started. So in St. Louis, there were really 2 Black pediatric offices. You were either a Tillman baby or a Nash baby. And I was a Tillman baby. So Dr. Mary Tillman, who was a graduate, I learned later, of Howard University, that's where she went to med school, was my pediatrician. And shout out Tina, see you. And there was something about, I mean, obviously her skills with me as a physician stood out, but I thought her job was cool, but I feel like I noticed from a young age what her role in the community was. And I was really impressed by that. And so I decided, I actually told her, hey, one day I'm going to take your job. And so I kind of decided at a pretty young age, maybe around first grade, that I was going to be a pediatrician. I think going through sort of high school and college, I got interested in a lot of different things, whether it was business, et cetera, but always came back to medicine. I did undergrad at University of Virginia, was a non-science major because I didn't love science, but I loved sort of more sociological things and the study of how people relate. And then I went to Duke for medical school. While there, I got my MPH at UNC, and really thought, like Dr. Tillman, I was going to go back and be a primary care pediatrician. That was totally my game plan. Because in med school, I didn't like being in the hospital, but I did like caring for kids. I couldn't deal with adults. I decided I wasn't a surgeon, even though I liked procedures. And then when I got into residency at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, I found that it was the sickest kids that really drew me in. And I think that there were people that I was able to connect with, that I could see myself reflected in what they were doing, and the interest that they had. If I take a step back, I think peds in general, I had an interest from a young age, but I think when I got into medical school and had the opportunity to talk with people, folks will say you'll find your people. So I found that the pediatricians were very social justice oriented. They cared a lot about the community. It wasn't just about their one interaction with the patient, but it was about how that kid was going to do well after that interaction. And something about that really spoke to me and what I was interested in. And I think even in deciding to do critical care, I found that that same theme stands.
And so my story is as far as kind of how I got to this place. So I grew up in New Jersey, and my pediatrician, actually none of my doctors growing up were Black, but your pediatrician, regardless, if you always develop a very strong relationship with them, it's a doctor that you see over and over again. I think actually where my interest in pediatrics came from is because my mom is a teacher. And so just the idea of being able to influence young people's lives was something really interesting to me. Teaching is not my calling. It is certainly my mother's calling. I don't have the patience for that in that unique space as far as the school setting. But medicine, I think, gives you that flexibility to be a teacher, to be a care provider, to be an advocate. And so there are a lot of different roles that you can play. So I always knew that I was going to be a pediatrician, like as early as the first grade. I was a pre-med in undergrad at Rutgers, double major in biology and psychology, and then went on to get my MPH first before starting medical school. And it was really in my MPH program that I found my passion in pediatrics, and that was that the clinical side is interesting, but it's just like Dr. Fowler was saying, all the things that happen when the child leaves the doctor's office, what's happening in their school, what's happening in their neighborhood, what's happening at home, and how all those things really affect how frequently they have to come back to you, or how frequently they have to come to the hospital, or their ability or inability to be able to manage their chronic healthcare needs. And so that's really where my interest and passion in pediatrics lies. I have huge interest in policy and advocacy. My MPH is in community-oriented primary care, so really thinking about prevention and health promotion in that way. So that's really kind of how I've been curating my time. I spent the time between my master's and medical school really working in the school space, first for the now School-Based Health Alliance, formerly known as the National Association for School-Based Health Centers, thinking about how you can leverage school spaces to access kids where they're at. And then went on to do some health education work where I was working with an organization called Peer Health Exchange that trained college students. So still in that like almost pediatric space to then go into high schools and teach high school students about health education in a way that was relatable to them. And then before medical school, also worked for another organization called the Alliance for a Healthier Generation, where I was really focused more on nutrition and physical activity and the policies for that. So how schools are able to develop wellness councils and districts and policies that they have to support wellness in the school space. I think what excites me the most about pediatrics, and this resonated so much when I was in medical school, is that you can really see the impact of your efforts. So if you're a kind of instant gratification person, pediatrics is perfect. So when a kid comes into the hospital, when they are sick, they're miserable, they don't want to play with you, any of that. But then when they get better, they're bouncing all over the walls, they're playful, they're talkative. And so you can really see that you really actually like turn this kid's whole world around in just a matter of a couple days. And then also what I think is really important is that from my public health landscape, wanting to think about sustainable change and impacting whole communities, kids are a really unique way to do that, because you find that adults who are not always as driven or able to manage their own health conditions are typically more altruistic and ready to think about the changes that they can make in their life when it's for the good of their child or the good of the children in the community that they're in. And so you're thinking about impact when you work with kids and when you're advocating for kids. It's something typically that everyone can get behind. And so that is exciting for me.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. All right. So we're now moving into the Q&A portion of this segment. So please feel free to type in your questions in the chat if you have any questions. We have a question now. So how do you balance your priority with the patient? And anyone can start.
So well, unless someone else you want me to start. So I think it comes down to you, and you might hear this term more often, shared decision making. So whenever I work with a family, I always try to get I try to gauge what can they really do. So of course, you're right. I have certain thoughts, plans already set up in my mind. And at the same time, I need to think about, okay, what can really be accomplished and what can they really do and what really is appropriate. And so I think back, and actually, to be honest, I think COVID-19 and the recent incidents really sort of highlight what can really a family be able to accomplish. And so it's always important to have an open conversation, not really have an authoritative personality or that type of style. So when it comes to my children with a variety of developmental and behavioral needs, I always look at what can they do that's within their houses, within their environment, in terms of making sure we promote the best and the healthiest type of developmental outcomes. And so some things, they may not be able to accomplish. And that's okay, but they're still trying to work hard. And some of these families are really resilient and bring in a lot of creativity. And I applaud that. You got to praise that. It's important that whenever decisions are made, that everybody has that shared responsibility. That's extremely important. In the end, they understand where I'm coming from. Usually if I'm trying to provide some type of recommendation, I have some evidence and reality and rationale to back it up. And I explain that to them in full. And they usually have an understanding when I'm really honest about that. Don't sugarcoat it, be honest about that. And so that's what's important, and really is the key, is shared decision making. That's really important. I'll stop right there to let other people add on.
I think you really summed it up. It is you prioritize the patient because the patient comes in and has their priorities. I think as a resident, oftentimes we are guided as well by our senior residents and attendings as well, to think about like other things that we want to be supporting the families with. But at the crux of it, it really is like, what are the priorities of the family? What is it that brought them in, and what changed between yesterday and today, if it's something that's more chronic or long-term that really shifted them to feel like they needed to come into the hospital? Like, that's the biggest piece.
Yeah, and just to add, echoing what everyone said, but just to add, a lot of times I find myself now asking the question, like, is this actually necessary? Like, does this have to happen now? Do we have some wiggle room? So I remember, when you're learning, you just get, this is what you have to do for, your 6-month well child check. This is what you have to do for your 1-year well child check. But like, it's important to realize that a lot of that is nuance. And as folks were saying before, figuring out what the family needs and meeting them where they're at, and just kind of being willing to be flexible in that. A lot of times that works in your advantage, and that not only does the family get what they need, but you help build that relationship of trust, so that as you continue to work as a primary care doctor, as I continue to work with these families, we've kind of started building a foundation of trust where they feel heard and feel seen. And so that just pays off dividends as you continue on over the years caring for them. And so it really behooves you to to really listen and let them be heard and do what you can to meet them where they're at.
There's really no bad time to get an MPH. So the question is, when would be the best time to obtain an MPH if my school doesn't offer the option? Forever and ever and always. It's an excellent degree to have. I think it depends on what you want to do with the MPH. I got mine before medical school, and I thought that it was awesome because it actually reframed the way that I thought about medicine and going to medical school. But getting it while you're in medical school, getting it while you're in residency, getting it after residency, there's always a good time to think about public health.
Yeah. So I once heard someone say that the MPH is the thing you get in medical school because you have the most time to do it then, that you don't necessarily fully understand why. And then the thing that once you're through your training and full out on faculty, the time to do it is a little bit harder. So I tend to think that there are folks who will advise you to just get other degrees. And I think people do it for various reasons. One, I think if you really have a public health interest, community health interest, policy interest, an MPH or an MPP, something like public policy are great things to get. And I think it's a skill set for you. I think if you're interested in research, you can focus on things like epi or stats, which can be really helpful, or maternal child health. My MPH was focused on public health leadership. And I really did it because I thought that was going to be potentially a huge part of my career. And so I think if you have an interest in that, it's the right thing to do. I also think that it's great and it flexes in a lot of different ways when you pair it with medicine, regardless of the particular specialty that you're going to go into. I don't think you should get an MPH because you're not yet in med school and you're not sure what else to do. And I don't necessarily recommend checking a box because sometimes people are like, well, let me get this other degree because it'll make me more competitive. I think it does still need to fit and weave into the story of what you think, at least at that stage, your career might be. If your med school doesn't have it, I think it really varies. For some people, taking an extra year or two and doing that work at another institution is something they'll want to do. It's often not something that's you're able to do in residency unless, let's say, you're in a surgical subspecialty that has multiple years with something carved out for research. But if you do fellowship, and that could be either for a subspecialty or even just an academic fellowship, particularly in pediatrics, a lot of those programs are going to afford you the opportunity to get it. And oftentimes they're connected with a school, and then maybe you can actually get paid for. And so I think if it's a passion of yours and you know you want to do it, you want to have a strong reason for it, whether because it fits into your career somehow. And I think the timing really depends on how it works for you.
I think there were some other questions about the MPH more first before this one, but I lost track of the questions.
Go ahead and just answer. Oh.
Okay. So I think that I'll just answer the question specific for me first, and then I can also talk a little bit about the pros and cons of the MPH. So for me, I've wanted to be a pediatrician, like I mentioned, since I was very young, and mentors are so vital to that. And mentorship and people who guide you along the path, they look different ways in different stages of your career. So as an undergrad, I had mentors just really trying to help me figure out what medical school should look like, whether or not I should go straight out of undergrad, how I should curate my college experience to best prepare me for medical school. And then in my MPH program, I think I found mentors who were not necessarily clinicians, who were helping me to think outside of the box of what it meant to be a healthcare provider and how other disciplines outside of medicine are able to also work on shared issues within the community. And so I have a lot of mentors out of my MPH program who I continue to connect with, who can just help me think about how in medicine you have a certain sort of access that you might not have through social work or through public health or through education that allows you to see patients one-on-one. And so you have that one-on-one impact, and then also can magnify your voice to be able to influence policy. And so those mentors are important as well. When you get to medical school, you find not just mentors who are really guiding you through the way, but just people that you interact with maybe one time, maybe two times. And honestly, every single person on this panel has offered me some sort of mentoring advice over the last 2 years as I've been trying to get to this place to be a resident. Dr. Walton, as I was trying to balance being on the board for SNMA and not flunking out of medical school, which is an important thing to prioritize, being from South Jersey and having like a huge interest in CHOP and really trying to think about what that looked like on the residency trail. Dr. Fowler was an excellent insight to me. I literally stalked her down at like Atlanta's SNMA in order to ask her more questions about CHOP and residency and applying. And then even just thinking about what it means to be a Black woman in medicine in the residency program that might not necessarily have that many or any other African Americans in your program, especially since I was transitioning from an HBCU. Danielle and I had like excellent conversations about some of the things that they had done in San Francisco to help to like continue supporting each other. And, kudos to her. I've actually taken so much of that advice and brought it with me to Chicago and applied it. So mentorship looks different in different ways, but you should certainly leverage the expertise and the advice of anyone at any stage in your life as they're giving it to you. And then just to step back and think about some of the pros and cons of the MPH, and also obviously the other panelists can jump in as well. The biggest con, I guess you would say, or the drawback is the finances of it. So if you don't have all the money in the world, which I assume most of us do not, paying for another degree is a gift that keeps on giving. And, my loans do keep me up at night. And so I walked into medical school already with significant amount of debt because I had another degree before even starting medical school. So that's certainly something that you think about. But as far as the benefits, again, it really is what you make of it. For me, having done my MPH before medical school, and then because I already knew I wanted to do pediatrics, curating my public health experience to be in the K through 12 space where I was working with kids and really understanding the experiences of pediatric populations and the things that a pediatrician can affect. A lot of that came in really handy on the interview trail and allowed me to, in medical school, really focus more energy on studying because I already had several things on my CV that could demonstrate my interest and passion in pediatrics, not necessarily clinically, but still in a way that makes sense for a pediatrician.
All right, so the next question is, how has COVID affected your practice in terms of telemedicine? Have you seen any positives in this situation?
So I can go ahead first with that since I've been doing a lot of it now since the end of March. So we did switch over to telehealth. In some ways, at first probably it was a little nerve-wracking, a little nervous. EMR changes, coding and billing changes. But to be honest, there have been some benefits. So I think it was family dependent. For example, a lot of us probably on this panel are seeing patients from maybe 2-3 hours away. And so in some ways, one of the pluses is we actually have better outreach to some of our families so that way they don't have to have that extra barrier of traveling to us when we can actually help them and go to them. That's actually been a huge plus for a lot of our families. And I know Dr. Fowler and all of us can probably speak to that. At the same time, I think it also depends on the resources and going back to the social determinants of health. For example, if the broadband connectivity is not the best, it can be tough. Or, if for whatever reason, certain storms. So as I was telling them, there was a storm that came through. So I was questioning, am I going to have the best connectivity or just the best resources? And so that's the other thing we have to play with. Also, for some of my children who have developmental and behavioral concerns, when COVID came and when many events have come, that might have affected their ability to access educational resources. Because when this started, they were in school. So that's another plus too. Can they get outside? Can they get the exercise and be able to eat right? So it's a two-edged sword. In some ways, there have been some positives, and it's been great for some families. For other families, it's taken a true interdisciplinary and interprofessional approach. It's a bias. That's why I sort of love my specialty, because that sort of that takes into account, what we try to do. So I had to involve extra resources and become more than just a DBP to really try to help the family. So, but there's been pluses and minuses, and I think moving forward when this pandemic resolves, they should still keep a component of telehealth continuing, because I think in some ways this can still be a help with in-person clinics.
I would say for us, the biggest, or for me, the biggest plus or benefit is that, with our well child checks, take that for example, we can't really do kind of some of the normal things, like in terms of tracking growth or doing vision screens and hearing screens. And so it's been, so what do you do with that time? And so we've been able to do a little bit more dedicated screening for social determinants of health, for ACEs. And because we have that time now, it's kind of pushed us to figure out ways to kind of meet families, other needs outside of, just purely medical ones. And so that's been really great, figuring out where the food resources are and how we can connect them. Just even filling out forms online with families and having the time to do that has been a plus. And so we've just been trying to, it's a challenging time for a lot of our families because a lot of folks who have lost jobs or have reduction in work hours and are having trouble making ends meet. And so we've been able to step a little bit more into that gap and help connect them. And so that's been one thing that's positive that's come from this.
I will add, though, because I do agree with you, Dr. Danielle, but just to all those who are not in med school, but just here and welcome to Facebook Live, you still should go get your vaccines and do the well child visits.
Yes,
so I have to put that out there. So,
please.
please do that.
All right, thank you. So this question in particular is for Dr. Walton. Do you have any advice on deciding between developmental behavioral peds versus child and adolescent psych? It seems that Erica is stuck between the two.
Hey, Erica. First of all, thank you for your question. Oh, and I know you're torn because I have some good child and adolescent psych colleagues. They are great people. Please know that. But I'm clearly biased. And so with that, I'm going to tell you to push developmental behavioral peds. So here's the fun thing I like about our field. It's really broad. And for some people, it's too broad or okay, what can you do? But you can actually do a lot. So for example, a lot of us, we're board certified pediatricians. So that is one of my board certifications, right? And then on top of that, I can actually do developmental testing with my children. Maybe not as full as as long as a child psychologist, but I actually have that skill. So I can do developmental testing of a variety on babies, toddlers, school-age children. I can mix it up. We also do prescribe medications. We do that. We also do a lot of advocacy and working with schools with their individualized education plans or IEPs. We also, I co-run a genetic syndrome clinic, Williams syndrome. And so all the med students out there, y'all should look up Williams syndrome and what that entails and what chromosome is affected by that, which is fun because there's a lot of medical concerns as well as developmental and behavioral concerns. So what I'm telling you is it's pretty varied. It's pretty huge. On top of that, you'll also hear of, and CHOP has it, we have it, a lot of us have what's called LEND programs. And child psychiatrists have helped out. I actually met a child psychiatry fellow through them, but a lot of DBPEDS fellows are within this mix. It's called Leadership Education in Neurodevelopmental Disabilities. A lot of them are funded by the Maternal Child Health Bureau, actually. And so these are interdisciplinary mini fellowship programs or a year fellowship program where it's not just DBPs, but you're also working with psychologists, social workers, speech therapists, physical therapists, occupational therapists, self-advocates. So those individuals who themselves have developmental disabilities, family advocates, and then you're working with MPH or Masters in Administration students, but you meet together and you try to solve and work together on different leadership and educational and community involvement activities together. And that's important because when you work with children with a variety of chronic conditions, from hem-onc, sickle cell, it's going to take an interdisciplinary approach. And to me, I feel physicians can be the agents of change with that plan. And so that's my bias in developmental peds. That's how I was exposed to it. I thank CHOP for that because I was actually exposed to LEND there. And now I'm an associate LEND director where I am, focusing on advocacy. And so that's my bias. Erica, I hope that helped answer your question. I love my child and adolescent psych people. We actually do work hand in hand. But I do like that developmental behavioral peds. We have a variety and you can pick, you can keep it broad or keep it a niche, however you desire.
All right, thank you for that. So the next question, so there are some individuals who are reluctant about going into PEDS because of potential pushback from parents and caregivers. They just want to know, how do you navigate the doctor-patient-parent relationship in your practice as a physician?
Yeah. I can start this one off because I think we're all going to have a little bit of a different lens based on what we see. So again, I'm a pediatric critical care doctor, so I'm in the ICU. And so I probably am a little bit more directive in some of my care, depending on the situation, than let's say if I was in primary care or even hospitalist medicine, because I'm dealing with kids who are extremely ill, who need resuscitation, et cetera. But I think there's definitely still a challenge there when it comes to, one, trying to advocate for the patient, because that's your patient, but your parents are also patients. And so I think building rapport is huge, trying to understand a little bit of the story that a family brings in, because often, at least in my experience, I'm meeting them in a moment, and it's often a very stressful moment, a very acute moment, and there's something very specific, at least one thing that I probably need to accomplish in a short amount of time. But I think one of the challenges that I love about pediatrics is you have to learn how to build rapport with that family. If you have an older patient who's communicative, you're going to be building rapport with them. But a lot of times the folks making the decisions, especially in a critically ill child, are going to be the parents or caregivers. And so I actually think that that's a great challenge. I do think that you have to be someone who is willing to engage in that. And I found that I was more forgiving of kids who threw tantrums than I was of adults who threw tantrums. And so I can deal with a parent who's upset about their kid more than I can a 40, 50, 60-year-old man or woman who's upset about something else. And then I have to continue to care for that individual as their patient. So I would sort of flip it and say it made me less reluctant, because you're going to deal with adults either way. But I think building rapport, I think you get to develop a whole nother set of skills in communication in pediatrics. Because you do have to figure out how to get you and the caregivers aligned on the same team. And so I would say it's definitely a piece of it, but to me, it's an added benefit of the care that we get to provide.
I will agree with that, you have to deal with adults one way or the other, whether or not you're doing pediatrics or adult medicine. And I've actually found that I am far more an empathetic provider for kids when the parents, because you and the parents are on the same page, everyone is focused on the kid and the kid getting well, and just resolving whatever reason the child is in the hospital. And so I think just remembering that you're on the same team there helps a lot. And it's putting yourself in the position of the parent and what it would mean to have a sick child, I think builds a level of empathy. Versus when you are doing adult medicine, you want to be on the same team as your patient, but oftentimes you have patients who are reluctant to heed your advice or reluctant to trust, for good reasons, often just to trust the medical system and to trust the advice that you're giving them. And so I think that really, if you think about it, in pediatrics, it's a lot easier to work with adults as parents than it is as patients.
All right. So now moving on to our next question. What advice would you give a third or fourth year medical student to further their interest in pediatrics?
I will jump in. I guess I'm closest to being a third or fourth year medical student on this panel. I mean, honestly, you have to see it to know that it's what you want to do. So whether it is spending some time in a pediatrician's office outpatient, like really maximizing opportunities to explore pediatric medicine and what it means, and like just the different ways that a pediatrician practices. So when I was in medical school, I worked with like the medical director for the school district, who was also a pediatrician, but then had my third year clerkship, also did some just community opportunities with other pediatricians. As a student, you're in this really unique space where it's the last time in your life that it's not totally weird to just hit a person up out of nowhere and ask them to spend time with you or to talk to you, because you're a student and you're thirsting for knowledge and you want to know more. So, I mean, just take advantage of it in any way you can. NMA is also a great opportunity. They're really welcoming to medical students in the pediatric section. I went as a third year medical student and they were terrific. I mean, every pediatrician there is like so excited to meet medical students and mentor medical students. And help you to think about other opportunities, like why you might want to consider peds. So NMA is a great opportunity as well.
All right,
That was
thank
good. That was good, Dr. Chittima. Thank you for that.
All right. So outside of getting an MPH, do you have any advice on getting more involved in advocacy work and really finding your space within the public health realm of pediatrics?
I feel like I'm doing a lot of talking here. If anyone else wants to jump in, please, by all means.
Yeah.
I could jump in, but I was trying to let
Danielle, you want this one off? With your pals or the program you run, the Plus program and everything.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. I was gonna let some. I'm ready. Yes, I can. I can contribute to this question. I'd say going kind of off of what Dr. Chittima was talking about in terms of being a student and kind of feeling free to kind of talk to people off the cuff, just cold email folks and kind of see what they're doing. I feel like that's a lot of what I did in terms of getting involved. And the thing about pediatrics is just that, kids are kind of, everyone cares about kids. Like you won't hear one person saying, oh, I can't stand them. And so you can always find people who care about kids, even if you're thinking of, I want to do legislative advocacy or different things, bringing up issues around kids, everyone cares about that. So you find a lot of people who are willing to listen and who are willing to kind of partner with you around that. So there's a lot of different ways to take it. I would say folks are, at least in my experience, in general pediatrics, folks are kind of hungry for that kind of expertise that we bring. And so whenever I go to talk to the schools, whenever I go to talk to legislators, they're really interested in what you have to say. And they're really, really kind of excited to meet with you and talk with you. And so it just putting yourself out there is great. It opens up those opportunities to kind of see where you can partner and how you can get involved. I would say, and I would say, yeah, that's the biggest thing. It's just kind of being willing to put yourself out there because people want to hear what you have to say. You bring a unique perspective, and it's just kind of trusting in that expertise and being willing to take a few risks.
I'll add that I think while the MPH will give you some skills in how to do maybe assessments or studies and a little bit of working knowledge of how things go from ideas to policy. And then again, depending on your focus, if it's epi or leadership or maternal child health, et cetera, may help you. I really think, and I feel like I see this with our residents a lot at CHOP, is within your pediatric training or in practice, you're going to see an issue that you care about. And I think that this was spoken to earlier in a really great way, that folks love having doctors as a part of the work that they're trying to do, because you bring a level of expertise and automatically your level of education makes people listen to you. And so I think that for a lot of pediatricians, finding something you're passionate about and figuring out who's working on it gives you a ton of opportunity for advocacy. And again, I think sort of more formal training and things like your MPH, et cetera, I think really fits depending on what you want to do and how you want to utilize it. And again, I think being in a policy, let's say, position, or again, having sort of the skills to do things like assessment, statistical work, if you're trying to actually present it, some program development skills you're going to get in an MPH. But there are a lot of people who learn that along the way as they go, whether that's through mentors or, again, finding an issue that they care about and getting involved in it. So I would say that, at CHOP, for example, we have about 50 interns a year. And before they graduate, they all do some type of advocacy project. And most of them have no public health training at all. And so I think it's part of the DNA of pediatricians to advocate for something related to their patients.
I want to add to that, Dr. Fowler, you brought up some valid points. I feel with advocacy and with pediatrics and with patient care, it's a journey. And I'm glad that this goes along with the next question. So we're going to start addressing that. So for example, I wasn't even thinking of an MPH, and then all of a sudden near the end of residency and beginning the fellowship, I said, oh, okay, maybe I should. But then I remember my program director actually talked to me like, so what's the purpose of the degree? What are you going to do with it? And so, yes, my degree was more focused on social and behavioral sciences and related to my field. To be honest, I feel even after I finished fellowship, not realizing that I appreciated the statistics and the epi that I did learn, it was definitely helpful. But later on, you realize that it's a journey, and sometimes the opportunities will come out of nowhere, and sometimes the journey is going to change, and you should just go with it. Don't be very narrow-minded on, okay, I'm going to get this MPH, and it's for this, and this is what it's going to do. Make sure your eyes are open and not have that tunnel vision, because opportunities will arise. Like, I never thought I would have certain positions I have right now, but then opportunities fell in my lap. And really, that's how this field is. Entirely, all of pediatrics is like this. Sometimes a certain patient you've interacted with built into, who would have thought I co-directed genetic syndrome clinic? That was never part of the plan, but that happened. So you got to let the journey take you. You're right. Mostly every residency program and almost every fellowship program is going to have some type of scholarly project that's going to involve research or quality improvement or program development or some type of advocacy. And there's usually an advocacy component. So whether you need the MPH or not, you're still going to get a taste of it moving forward. And in terms of right now with the current climate, this is no better time than to get involved with advocacy. To be honest, we have two big pandemics right in front of us where our children are at risk. Even if our children don't have COVID, it's because of what's happening, they're still at risk. And their risk of having an ACE, to be honest, they're in front of an ACE right now. That alone does it. Racism and police brutality. Yes, we need to talk about it more because that affects our kids. That's the next generation. That's why we're hitting so hard in terms of policy and legislative action on every single local level. This is the time to talk because it's our kids that are going to be clearly affected in the future unless we don't make changes that sustain over time. I'll stop right there.
The only thing, can I add something with that question real quick, that last one? Along with that, it's been really interesting kind of these last couple of weeks, these last couple of months, because a lot of the work that we do, sometimes it can, along with when thinking about advocacy, sometimes it can feel like you're kind of hitting your head against the wall and no one's willing to listen, and you just keep talking about these same issues and no one's willing to listen. And it seems like in these last weeks, everyone wants to listen. Now, who knows how long that'll last, but it does feel like, things are moving quickly, which is in some ways, which in a lot of ways is good because these issues have been long-standing. It's really interesting. I feel like when things first happened with coronavirus, people were much more focused on the adult side because kids didn't get severe symptoms a lot. But when you think about its effects on the economy, its effects on whole families, kids, you consider kids in those units. And so it really provided us an opportunity to advocate, even though I feel like a lot of people were more focused on the adults. And so it's always just kind of bringing to the forefront how this is affecting our kids. Because if it's affecting adults, that means it's affecting families and it will affect the kids. And so it was just kind of a frame shift for people to think about that. But our job as pediatricians is to bring that to the forefront. And so it was just another way in which you as a pediatrician are valuable because you're bringing that kind of other framework that can kind of push things forward.
All right, so the next question is, what are ways we can begin to look at historical context to help bring an end to perpetual health disparities in our communities?
I think that there are a lot of ways that we can do that. In my residency program, I think one thing that we are really trying to start doing is to think even as early as orientation for our new residents about acknowledging and recognizing the history that the institution has had in the community that we are situated in, the good, the bad, and the ugly of how we've served, what we've done right, what we've done wrong, and then where we're moving in the future as far as like really being allies for the community. So at University of Chicago is on the south side of Chicago, and our catchment area is predominantly African American. And so as many private institutions have sort of a marred history, if you will, with communities of color as they have situated themselves in their, like in the name of service. And so I think first and foremost, it's starting at the earliest points in medical school, in residency, and being able to educate the trainees to understand that historical context, because they need to bring that into the way that they're interacting with each of the patients, and understanding that if a patient is resistant to something you're recommending, like it might not be just because of what's happening in the room right now, but because of generations, excuse me, because of generations of what's been happening between that hospital and the community, and how they've come to see the providers or the representation of that institution. And that's really important.
Yeah, I want to add that I actually think that the current climate makes this a really great question, Anome, because I will say that I think so often people look in the healthcare field at health disparities as fixing very health-related problems. Now, I think not your folks who sort of do this work on a more broad level, but I think trying to get the folks who make the decisions at an institutional level to think about the historical context such that it's not just about the insurance mix that you allow to make sure that the kids have access or the family has access. It's not just about the number of clinic hours that you have going later. It's not just about putting more programs after school, right? It's about actually looking at the way we have allowed our communities to be isolated, not have the resources that they need there, and that comes from a historical context. So I think if you look right now at the arguments and discussions around police brutality, what you're seeing people do is go back to the history of how policing started, right? And so by bringing the historical context up, people are actually saying this is how we got where we are. And I think that as that history is now having a very real impact on the way people see things because their eyes have been opened, I think we have a very unique opportunity with health disparities as well. And I think what you'll start to see, I think as Dr. Chidema said, in terms of institutions, is not just them looking at what they're doing inside, but how have they contributed to this historical context. And I think that has to happen at a grassroots level going up, but also at the top down. And so I think ways that we can begin to look at it are continuing to connect the dots for people so that they see it's not just about like fixing what happens between me and the patient in front of me, but it's actually looking at the entire system and the way that we have set people up to end up with disparate outcomes.
And then I think to build on that, I think we need to make sure we're honest about the history we're providing, making sure it's truthful and accurate. On top of have discussions about these topics, because sometimes I think it needs to be a review. Sometimes we got to watch what we read and what we listen to on social media. And I believe that when we start having honest conversations and really listen to each other. So a lot of us already have the mindset of, all right, we need a plan. Whenever a tragedy or disaster happens, we need a plan. In this case, freeze. Time out. We need to really make sure we have an honest conversation and really listen critically to each other on how we feel, our expressions, share our thoughts, our fears, our aspirations, but really have an honest conversation. And if we bring in the history, we need to bring in the whole history and bring in the truth. That's a big important piece, because if we want really to do and have a plan moving forward that we want sustained, we need to have the facts and the true history present.
All right. So right now, Sydney is trying to decide between peds and med peds, and the main reason is because she wants to do transition care focusing on chronic diseases, particularly in heme-onc. Dr. Fowler, do you have any advice on that?
Yeah, that's actually a really great question, Sydney. And I think that your answer is, when I'm interviewing med peds applicants, the answer that I actually want to hear. So a lot of people are like, do I do peds, med peds, or family medicine? I think that if you're looking at transition of care and you want to see folks go into adulthood, if you want to see adult patients and understand how that care varies from childhood on, let's say heme-onc is what you want to use, then I think that med peds is definitely the right thing. I think that if you're looking at something that's somewhat subspecialty related that you have a particular interest in focusing on, I think that med peds is great for that, because it's often heavy inpatient focus with some outpatient. You're going to get really robust learning from all of those subspecialties. And so I think that could be helpful. That being said, in pediatrics, there are a growing number of chronic diseases, congenital diseases that kids live with for a long time. So for example, our in cardiac disease. You have a lot of congenital cardiac defects that adult cardiologists are not used to seeing. And so you actually have a subspecialty that developed within pediatric cardiology called adult congenital. In our oncology department in particular, we treat 20-something-year-olds up to probably 24 because they can actually handle higher doses of chemotherapy than sort of your more typical adults. And so you're definitely going to have an opportunity. And then adolescent medicine is going to be another space for that. So I think if you have a real interest in caring for adults as a continuum for the chronic diseases, then I think MedPeds is great. I think there are a lot of gaps in transition of care, especially for kids and young and adolescents who have a lot of chronic illnesses. They're used to seeing their pediatricians. Their pediatricians are used to being a one-stop shop, and the adult care model is just a little bit different. And so I think there's definitely a unique sort of niche for folks there. But I think that what you're looking at is, if you want to transition them and stay with them into adulthood, I think MedPeds is great. If you're just looking for sort of a broader age category, then pediatrics may be sufficient for what you want to do.
Can I add to that, Dr. Fowler? You were so right. And Sydney, I think it's a phenomenal question. Please also know that no matter you can't go wrong either way, number one. Number two, this is definitely a part of what I deal with all the time. I still have some adult patients, and those patients turning 18 that become very afraid. They're like, no, we can't leave you, Dr. Walton. And I'm like, don't worry. And we're developing a transition plan. And some patients I do keep, some patients I will transfer. But one of my biggest mother mentors in the world actually was MedPeds trained. And though she's more in peds now, but she totally had the full training and can do anything and everything. To be honest, she was actually the previous peds section chair of NMA before me. And so I love her, adore, and she's amazing. And she has taught me so much. And so I wanted to tell you, no matter what, you can't go wrong. And even if you do med peds, and I actually think you should, I know some amazing med peds providers who do phenomenal work. But then no matter what you do after you've had the training, you might still want to stick with peds. You might still want to keep the med peds piece. You can't go wrong either way. I will say that. You cannot go wrong either way.
So this question can be directed to anyone. What would be your advice for students who have board failures but are planning to apply to residency this cycle?
I mean, I'll just quickly say, do it. I talk to people for sure, but it's more than just your board score. So I will be totally transparent and say that I did not pass step 2 the first time, CK. But obviously I matched, and I'm about to finish my intern year, so it's not an impossible task. I do think that it is very person specific, and it really matters what else is in your application. So this is when mentors and people that you can trust to have honest conversations with you about your application as a whole come in handy, i.e. like Dr. Fowler, because she and I were really in my application deep when I was applying.
Yeah, I would add to that, to be ready to discuss it. So I think some folks will choose to wait for somebody to mention it. And I think depending on how your interviews are structured, and obviously this year is going to be a little bit different with everything being virtual. Some people have your whole packet. Some people just have a little bit. And the person who has your whole packet will likely mention it or ask the question. And so I think you want to be able to own it, right? If there was something going on in life, I think you have the opportunity to be really honest about that. And I think anything that is less than what we would want, there's an opportunity to share sort of, this is my lesson learned, and this is how I either reshape something for the next time or have applied the lessons I learned to something else. And so I think people want to see growth, and there's a maturity and be able to own it and then move forward. I totally agree that talking to mentors and other individuals, and then I think making sure that you just have a broad list of programs. Sometimes people will say in pediatrics, it's not that competitive. Some programs are more competitive than others. So I always say, shoot your shot, go for the place you want to be. And then also just make sure you give yourself a really broad list. I think this is going to be a very different year because I know folks that are not probably going to be able to take their board exam, like their step 2, for example, just because everything's been canceled with COVID. And so I do think that making sure you've had some discussions with people is going to be helpful, because I think this is just going to be a weird year in terms of a lot of applications that don't look as complete or tight as people would expect across the board.
All right, thank you. What are some things you all did in medical school that helped you feel, that helped you stand out on your residency applications?
I think I can speak to this a little bit. So as someone who reviews applications, the things to me that are most important are things that you actually cared about. Like, there's not necessarily a formula. There's not like a specific thing like, oh, this really stood out to me, that really stood out to me. It's like, was this something that you cared about? And does that passion and that care speak through? People do a variety of different things. And I can't say there was one particular thing that always hits the nail on the head. But you can tell if someone really cared about it and if they were passionate about it. And if this was, something that like they just ate, slept, breathed it. And I think that's probably the most important. I think that there's not like a set formula anymore. And I think that that you can really go for the things that make you tick. And I think that's kind of what stands out the most. There's a lot of ways that you can kind of tailor it based on the school that you're applying to, or based on this on kind of what you want to do down the road. But that's what stands out the most.
Yeah, I would agree with all that. Some things that I did specifically that were good conversation starters on the interview trail were the student-led health center. So we had a student-run clinic at Morehouse, and I was one of the directors my second year. So that was something that I was able to talk about, just expanding the clinic, the population we served, and what it looks like to really run a clinic in that way. And then obviously I'm going to plug SNMA because it's always a great conversation starter, and there are so many things to do. So I served on the board for SNMA. I was also a future leadership project fellow. I was a coordinator for FLP as well. And so just having leadership opportunities, it's the things that you're passionate about. So just like Dr. Danielle said, the things that you eat, sleep, and breathe. I am on the intern selection committee now, and we had an applicant who, in her application, she was talking about being on the Quidditch team in college and just how that, how excited she was about that. And that was amazing. So it really isn't a specific thing. It is how you explain it and what it meant to you.
Thank you for that. So the next question is, do you feel HR 1384 is an important element of structural change up and downstream? Is universal health care an imperative foundation to equity and economic dignity?
So I'll start because I looked up HR 1384 when this came up, and this is the universal health care proposal that went through. I mean, I think that, I'm going to be honest, I think that we're probably all a little bit biased because we care for children. And I would argue that, yes, every child needs to be covered. And I think that actually our country, relatively speaking, agrees with that, because if you're not covered through your family, then Medicaid is often available. But I do think that if you can't get to preventive care, which is huge in pediatrics, then you are going to be set up for further health disparities, et cetera. Whether or not the way this is happening and laid out in this plan is the exact right way, I won't pretend to be a health economist and know that that's really the truth. Economic dignity, maybe. I mean, I think what you're talking about, if you think your health is tied to your ability to do things like work and have a living and build wealth, then absolutely. I think that that's really important. And so whatever that access looks like, I think is crucial. And then I think in terms of the economic sort of the healthcare system in general, when you think about the fact that multiple people buying into a system, though they don't all use it, I think is part of the reasoning behind this as well. But I think it'll be hard pressed to find a pediatrician who doesn't think every child and probably person should be covered with healthcare in some fashion.
It's probably mainly for Dr. Chittima.
Yeah. Okay. So as the resident on the panel, I do plan to subspecialize. Right now, my interest is leaning towards emergency medicine. I often get the question why I didn't just go into emergency medicine if I want to do pediatric emergency medicine. But for me, having the fundamentals and the foundation in pediatrics still lends to what I want to do outside of the hospital. And while I am interested in urgent and emergent cases surrounding children, I think what's also great about emergency medicine is the flexibility of scheduling. So it's shift work. And so being able to expand my interest outside of the hospital. what I've done to prepare for fellowship, it almost feels like med school in the same way. You know, you find mentors in the field, you think about research, just things that you're passionate about. So leadership is just something that kind of always comes to me. So I'm currently the resident liaison for the Illinois chapter for AAP, and that sort of gives me an opportunity to sit at the table and be the voice for residents for the Illinois chapter, and just thinking about how our seasoned pediatricians can support early trainees more. And then just thinking about like research that excites me, projects that excite me, and getting involved in the hospital community and then the larger community around Chicago.
So that's all.
Okay, so this question is, are there any studies that measure the economic, medical care costs and mental health costs of police excessive use of force?
Forgive me, I have not done the research to really answer that question. I apologize. So though we may not have exacts, I can say, at least from the years of practice I have, I've seen it. I know what the cost can be when I've seen it in my patients. And so evidence is important. Don't get me wrong. Data is important. And children's experiences are important as well. So that's what I see when I'm virtually seeing my patients and in person seeing my patients. And so that's what I have to go by, what's in front of me. And so I can tell you that there is an impact. That's why there's a policy, and I'm glad to be a member of NMA. I'm glad to be a member of AAP. I'm glad AAP acknowledged that racism has an impact on child's health. That's why there's a clear policy about it, and there's data to support it. Came out in 2019. And so I would say I will do my research, Mr. Bent, or Ms. Bent, and and I will try to get you an exact answer on the amount of studies that do exist.
Yeah, I concur. I don't know anything, but my guess is you're going to be hard pressed to find a causation type study that can clearly connect those things. I think especially because we're literally just having conversations now where people are talking about the burden of stress. And then I think when you get into mental health for the people who often face police brutality, we could spend a whole long conversation on whether or not our community actually has access to and significantly or consistently accesses the type of care, which I think would also mean any studies that show would be a gross underrepresentation of the actual cost and effect.
Great, thank you for that. There's time for one more question, but I just want to let the audience know that we will provide the contact info for the panelists in the comments. So for our last question, how have you navigated moments of failure during your medical career, and what did you do to achieve success later on?
So I can jump in first. First of all, thank you, namesake, for this question. I think that it's really about reframing. So I don't think that anything is necessarily a failure per se. It's more just you had a plan and you were maybe a little rigid in thinking that it was supposed to go this way, and you just have to pivot. I think really honestly, success in medicine is all about being flexible, all about being able to pivot, and all about being able to find some new plans. I have been like battered and bruised on this road to residency, if I'm being totally honest. Getting into medical school was a struggle. Getting out of medical school was a struggle. Getting into residency was a struggle. And, instead of really thinking about it as failures, it all lends to my story and was things that I was able to reflect on and recognize that all those experiences are why I am who I am today. It's why I'm as passionate as I am about the things that really drive me in pediatrics, and how I know that I can use that same energy to really relentlessly advocate for my patients, which are all the things that you want in any clinician, especially a pediatrician.
I 100% agree. I think one of the keys to that
Oh no.
Oh boy.
Okay.
Oh wait, I think it's coming back. Girl, you scared us. Don't do that.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I would say that the key to that reframing for me was kind of building my tribe at each step, which isn't always easy. Depending on where you go, you might find that you don't connect as easily with the people around you, but as much as you can, even if it's not the people there, but building a tribe of support, even outside of, say, medical school or residency rather, was important, because as those things come up, sometimes it was hard for me to find the light to even reframe myself. And so just having those people that you can go to that can help shift that for you was really important. A lot of that goes back to that either mentorship piece or just even peer mentorship was really important for me, especially in residency. It didn't even have to be in pediatrics. I found people outside in other specialties, especially because there weren't many people of color in pediatrics at UCSF. And so that was a really important kind of thing to have, so that I could have people who could help me shift that view when I couldn't do it for myself. So.
All right, great. Thank you so much to our amazing panelists. We really appreciate your support of the SNMA and our membership. For those of you in the audience, please scan the QR code and please give us some feedback as we're trying to create useful programming for you in the future. Please be sure to follow us on Instagram at SNMA_official, on Twitter at SNMA, and like us on Facebook. Most importantly, if you're not already a national member, please visit our website at snma.org and sign up to get connected. So here you see we have our events, our following events. Be sure to check out those events. And I just want to remind you that SNMA currently has a campaign called the See Us campaign, where we're talking about racism as a public health issue and just health disparities in general. So please just engage with us by sharing your perspective and your story. We would love to hear from you. Other than that, thank you for tuning in and have a great night.